Player season reviews. We're back looking at some veteran and younger, hard to describe this group guards today with Caitlin Cooper looking back on the 2022-23 seasons of Chris Duarte, TJ McConnell, and Buddy Hield. Lots of details, stats, clips that you won't get anywhere else. It's all coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, back on the player season review grind with Caitlin Cooper, and we're breaking down some guards slash vets slash I don't know what to call this group, but we're calling them veteran guards. It's TJ McConnell, Buddy Hield, and Chris Duarte, who is assuredly not a veteran by experience, but is a little on the older side for his experience level. We'll break down everything you need to know about their season via one stat, one clip, and one over-under looking forward for them, how they fit on the Pacers this year, what it could mean for next year, all sorts of details. If you go to Caitlin's Patreon, you can see all the clips we talked about and the stats written out, and some of them will be, of course, on Twitter as well. Fun week coming here at Locked On Pacers. Wembanyama is the topic for Wednesday. It's May. It's finally time to dive in to the NBA draft, starting with, of course, the prize of the show. We'll be talking about the salary cap and the CBA changes, how they affect the Pacers on Friday. And Thursday, Caitlin and I doing a show on Andrew Nembhard's rookie season. So lots of fun stuff for you every dayers, but today it's about the veteran guards. Let's jump right into it. Player reviews back. Really fun group today that is impossible to name as just a group, but they play guard positions and they're all older, I guess. Chris Duarte, Buddy Hield, TJ McConnell. We will refer to them as veteran guards. I think Chris Duarte would be insulted that I'm calling him a veteran after 2 years in the NBA, but there's no better words than that. Of course, joining me to do this, as we've been doing for all the players, is Caitlin Cooper from Basketball. She wrote for each player today one stat, one clip, and one over-under. We'll break it all down to review their 2022-23 NBA season, alphabetical order, starting with Chris Duarte, who was Caitlin's choice of player, one of her two for today. Caitlin, very weird year for Chris Duarte.
A very strange year. I remember before we started this series, you and I talked about the exit interview process and how his interview is by far the shortest. Because it's like, what do you really say about what this season was for him? This isn't the clip that I shared, but over the weekend I did my mailbag pod and somebody asked the exact question, which was, which is the real Chris Duarte, rookie Chris or sophomore Chris? And I felt like something that really summarized his season was in the first of the two home games that they played against Brooklyn before Steve Nash got fired. There was a moment when Kevin Durant was at the free throw line and you could see Chris in the background form shooting while Kevin Durant was shooting his free throw. And then after that, he made like a 30-foot three, and then he had his 30-point game in the next game against Brooklyn. And then the next game, within 5 minutes, he hurt his ankle. And that just feels like the stretch of like you could replay that over and over again, and it would just be Chris's season.
Yeah, I did feel bad at X interviews because I could tell too that he's like, I don't want to talk about my ankle anymore. Like it's all we've talked about this year. And he's right. It is. He didn't say any of that, but it's just a read I got. And it's a big part of his season, right? Like every time he got going a little bit, it flared up. He missed 6 weeks. He missed the last, 3 weeks of the season after a decent start to March too. So I get why he was frustrated, but I found it hard to dig in really because we'd conquered a lot of the other topics. But looking at his game, we have to differentiate two other versions of Chris between rookie Chris and sophomore Chris. There's also the last 5 seconds of every quarter Chris and the rest of quarter Chris that we have to differentiate. What would you like to do first between your clip, stat, and over-under for
I think I'm going to go to the clip if you have it available to you.
I do.
I picked both of these because it epitomizes to me what was a lot of unsureness and hesitancy on his part. So the first part is against Memphis, and he catches the ball above the break at the wing, and Jake LaRavia is closing out to him. He shot fakes to get Jake LaRavia in the air, and instead of leaning into the contact there, he puts the ball on the floor. And look at how short his first step is going off with his right. Like, he doesn't even take a big enough step to really get much of an advantage on Jake LaRavia, but he gets into his body, and there's several times this year where he stepped back into the left corner even when he could continue to take the baseline. So in this case, like Jaren Jackson Jr. is in the paint. I think they're guarding Terry Taylor because this was earlier in the season. But, then Chris ends up going for the much tougher step back. And now he tries to lean into the contact. And there was just a lot of plays this year where I would kind of describe him as reminding me somewhat of like an irregular heartbeat or an arrhythmia, where it felt like his rhythm was just unintentionally offbeat. So the second clip is against the Thunder, and he doesn't even wait for Isaiah Jackson to come set the screen, but he jails Josh Giddey behind him anyways, gets him on his back. Now there's a Gortat seal screen, and for whatever reason, Chris Duarte decides to decelerate, drags his right toe to plant his left, which was the injured ankle. And it's just, he completely loses the plot, and it's a wild, wild layup. Like, it's really kind of hard to imagine a worse use of a Gortat screen there. I don't know why, when he initially turned the corner, he didn't pull up in the non-restricted area of the paint and shoot, or at least try to continue to curl it, which Isaiah's kind of losing track of the seal a little bit. But in both cases, I just found myself watching Chris a lot of the time, and it was just like his advantage perception in terms of where to find the advantage just seemed off. Like I said, it just felt like a lot of hesitancy and being out of rhythm most of the year.
Sometimes to me it felt like, so I'll actually go back a little bit. When Victor Oladipo, even at his best with the Pacers, he had some games, maybe 1 in 10, where right when he caught the ball, I could tell if he was looking to shoot. And I couldn't explain why. It was just like his body language, where he would look, the way he would survey the court, that you could just tell. And it's rare that happens. Sometimes I get that feeling with Duarte, where when he catches, the way he sizes up his defender, the situation, you can tell he's like, okay, I'm going to make a move and try to shoot. And sometimes you get clips like what you just had, where he's like, okay, I can get to the right block and hit a fadeaway over this guy who's guarding someone under the basket, or I can beat Jake LaRavia off the dribble. I've got a nasty step back, and then he doesn't create any space, and it's ugly. And sometimes it does work, certainly. He had about the same percentage of his shots assisted this year and last year, so I think he knows when he can at least try to get those advantages. But I think sometimes it's too much in his head, and he can't think about what the alternative options are, whether that's swing it, take a different shot, try something else, and just gets locked into what he thought he would do right when he catches it.
Yeah, because he's taking a much tougher shot there than if he had just drawn the contact. And like his above the break 3-point percentage really fell off a cliff, because as a rookie, he shot 37% on above the break threes. This year, he shot 30%, which that particular three, he ends up moving himself into the corner. And that's kind of another thing. Like, he hasn't shot well from the right corner either season. Like, he is so much more comfortable moving to his left as a shooter, stepping back to his left as a shooter, that kind of impacts him on the court as well. So like, if you look at his synergy numbers, which this isn't going to be my one number, but his spot up points per possession was over a point per possession as a rookie. This year was 0.860. His pick and roll efficiency dropped. And like that clip that I showed, it's so strange to watch too, because I wrote a piece about Chris before the season started, looking at his play with the Dominican Republic's national team, as well as just the one game that he played in Summer League. And obviously it's a different level of competition. FIBA basketball is different, but you could see that his pacing was better, that he was being patient. He was giving the screener some direction. He wasn't attacking before the screen. He was waiting for it and even telling guys like, hey, flip the angle so I can go here. He'd throw a lefty, pass right off the dribble in stride. And there it's just like, he was back to what some of the moments were last year. So I'll go into my one number for him, which was 264. And that is where Chris Duarte's true shooting percentage ranked among the 270 players this season in the NBA who attempted at least 300 shots.
Oof. I was trying to guess what 264 was. I would not have gotten to that. That does not surprise me. I mean, they just didn't go in. I mean, that's not a fair way to assess it. But part of the season with him, when I would talk about him, especially right when he came back from injury with his struggles, was like the percentage of shots he took this season that were classified as open or wide open was higher than his rookie year for most of the year. I haven't checked in about a month. So I felt like he was mostly taking good shots, and they just weren't going in for a while. And so for a while, I thought, okay, eventually they'll go in. I've seen him shoot well. And yes, he takes a bad shot here or there, but in general, if they're still going to be that open, that's fine. They just never went in. And so that is like, at some point you have to go, okay, this is reality now. It doesn't matter how open they are. He just might not be that accurate at this stage. And I don't know where I land on that, because we have a whole season. He's been injured twice, but sample of of him making those shots to say, where is he on the efficiency standpoint? And some of the season, it felt like, to go back to your comment about the screens and stuff and his patience, like the pace of the Pacers was so fast that he couldn't quite keep up and do what he wanted. He wanted it to be a little slower, which last year's Pacers were when he was better. But still, like, I thought his shot diet would lead to more makes than it did. And so I wonder if it's a one season sample thing or if really something about this group just doesn't mesh with the way he likes to score. Hey guys, short little break here so I can talk to you about Gametime. If you ever have had to get tickets in the past, have been stressed, don't sweat it. That's happened to me before, trying to scalp tickets for Purdue basketball games. Growing up, the most stressful experience ever, getting them right before the game started. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime, fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. They've got flash deals and last-minute tickets for anything you want to go to. It's easy to find and buy tickets. You can see images of your seat view, and with a lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection, Gametime is perfect for you. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect. You can buy tickets in seconds, 2 taps and you're set, and they're set directly to your phone so you don't have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off with the Gametime app. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Yeah, or the ankle injury as well, because we don't know how much that was affecting his form. I know that he spoke that the coaching staff had told him that they thought he was leaning on some of his shots and that he felt like he had corrected that. There was just a lot of uncomfortableness because when you go back and watch the misses, there was not a lot of consistency in how he was missing. Because I tried to look for that. Like, is he overshooting it? Is it going short? Is it going left? Is it going right? It was kind of all of the above throughout the season. So, and even before the ankle injury, if we're being honest, when he was in the starting lineup for the first 3 games and they played the Spurs, there was a moment in that game where it looked like he had tweaked the toe injury from last year, where you could kind of noticeably see that. So I don't even know how much that was lingering for him. I don't know how his body felt. Neither of us are clearly doctors, but to your point about last year and the pacing and changes, like Sabonis assisted him more than anybody last year, which in part is because Sabonis had the ball in his hands a lot, but he assisted him 20 times at the rim. And there's a lot of times where if you're running like a Chicago action for Chris out of the corner, he's not going to get downhill as easily as Benedict Mathurin is and play into contact. He takes off way too early away from the rim, and then he kind of has to take these kind of awkward leaners. So he needs more screen help than maybe some of the other guys do on the team. So he might be missing some of that. Some of the stuff that we pointed out in the Tice episode, Chris wasn't really playing a lot with him, but those types of nuances might help him a little bit. So I think it's in part who is on the roster and who isn't on the roster that's somewhat of a conundrum from him. Because obviously, Benedict Mathurin was behind him very early in the season. Benedict was playing really, really well and scoring at ease. And, that I'm not going to say that was in Chris's mind. I'm sure he wanted his teammate to do well, but it was another contributing factor where there's people at his position and his role was changing a lot because, he was starting, then they started starting
more than anyone's.
Yeah. Then they started starting Aaron Nesmith for reasons that I understood in front of Chris. Then Chris hurt the ankle. And then there was even the point in time where, around whenever Nembhard was struggling with his shot for a little bit and they started bringing Nembhard off the bench when Tyrese was out and they were starting McConnell, that it almost felt like, I don't want this to sound derogatory, but like they were throwing Chris a bone. Like, okay, we're going to start you and we'll bring Nembhard off the bench and we'll start TJ. And stuff didn't really change for Chris that much during that roughly 4-game span. And then he ends up playing 4 minutes against the Lakers and then gets a DNP. Who was it? I think he gets the DNP against the Kings. And then in the following game, I believe that Rick told you guys, his ankle is bothering him. And then he sat out and it was listed for the ankle injury. But, he missed a couple games in front of the trade deadline that seemed a little bit like, why is he getting the DNP here? Unless something else is at play. I don't know what all you were told about that.
Yeah, I think that we saw him go out in Detroit. That was the last game he played before the ankle soreness in March. And then he played for however many minutes it was against the Hawks. It doesn't matter. But I know he got hurt in that game, but I don't know how much it was bothering him between his December return and that moment. I mean, I'm sure some. And Rick talked about it all the time, right? If you watch those post-game pressers, it's hard to come back from these injuries and it bugs you. I have a new stat for you, and that's 3, and that's the number of tabs I've opened since we started talking that all have an ad for the Mario and Luigi movie. So apparently that movie is paying out the wazoo for advertisements, and Chris Duarte is closely associated with it because I can't stop seeing this face. Over under for Chris Duarte, please.
Okay, so my over under for Chris is 5, and I'm setting it at 5. And here's the backstory at that: is I looked up last year to see how many games he played of his 46 that he did not make a three. And there was 19 games last year where he did not make a three. Then I looked at those 19 games to see if the Pacers won the minutes when he was on the court. And there was 5 of the 19 games where they managed to win the minutes if he did not make a three. So just by a comparison to this, Benedict Mathurin last year played 25 games where he did not make a three. He obviously played in more games than Chris did. And in 11 of those, the Pacers still finished in the positive or won the minutes when Benedict was on the court. And he got to the line 73 times in 11 games. And for the season, Chris Duarte attempted 72 free throw attempts. So in those 11 games where Benedict finished in the positive, he attempted more free throws than Chris did for the season, which they're different players. But I set it at 5 to ask you, if Chris is still on the roster next year, would you take the over and the Pacers winning minutes with him on the floor when he does not make a three?
Well, of those 5, 3 of them were by 5 points or less too. So very close to not even being among the 5. I think his best role is as a shooter. So if he's not a shooter, I mean, probably going to have to take the under, I think. I mean, the line is so close with him. I mean, I believe in his defense a little bit. You know, he is pretty well footed on the ball. That was not English. But he can like stay in front of guys and has decent length and stuff. So I think he has other ways to impact the game. But if he's so arrhythmic still next year, especially when he puts the ball on the floor and the shot is what it is, then I feel like I have to take the under.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I looked
But
at
the rest of the roster might be better though. I don't know. Maybe
I mean,
I shouldn't.
Well, yeah, that's a whole nother talking point though. Is those 5 games when they did manage to win his minutes, even though he didn't shoot. The one was against Toronto when the bench just absolutely throttled the Raptors bench. And that group of players, like, they kind of started to find a groove, and then shortly after is when they started the rotation carousel with the bigs. So I believe in that game it was Jalen, O'Shea, Chris, TJ, and Benedict. And they kind of just started to gel a little bit, but they only played in like 3 or 4 games before the rotation kind of started getting shook up every other game. And then also the 2 games against Miami, which in Chris's defense, Benedict did not play very many minutes in either of those games because he had his struggles of his own, and Chris played a little bit better. Like, if I'm putting them head to head, like, I do think Chris at this point in time is a better passer, not necessarily playmaker, but a better passer than Benedict if he can get downhill. But that's, the if there. So I would lean the under just because right now so much of Chris's value is what you said. It's tied to whether he makes threes or not. So if in games when he's not making a three, I would probably lean the under whether they win his minutes. I guess it depends who else is in the bench group. If Aaron and other people move back to the bench, maybe that helps. But that's kind of the story of his season and where the Pacers are at with him right now, I feel like.
Speaking of shooters, I believe it's time for a guy who made a lot of threes this season, Buddy Hield.
Buddy Hield did indeed make a lot of threes this season.
I wanted him to make 300 selfishly. That's just a cool number of threes to me.
So I'll just hop right in with my Buddy clip because I have to push back on some of the pushback I got. I was doing a different show somewhere else, and I made the comment and said that Buddy Hield is a very smart basketball player, and that did not go over well on the internet because people think that he loses his filter as a shooter, which on occasion he does. Like, I'm not going to say every shot that he ever takes is a good one, but in terms of what he does with spacing, I don't think anybody can replicate. And I'm not just talking about his actual shooting gravity and how close defenders play him. How he re-spaces the floor and is a continuous spacer. Nobody else on the Pacers matches that, which is why I picked this play. So it's just Buddy Hield stack screener. So this is from the first game of the season that they played against the Clippers. And Buddy's receiving an away screen, which is what the Pacers called wide. It's just Isaiah Jackson facing a sideline and screening for Buddy to move toward the ball. So Reggie Jackson top locks that. So the counter that the Pacers will go to is that Buddy then goes and sets a stack screen pick and roll if he can't get over that wide screen. So he's going to set the stack screen. And what people will see when they go over to my blog and see the clip is the Clippers are unique in how they defend stack action. A lot of times teams will drop the big and switch the guards. That's the most common way. But Reggie Jackson is actually trying to scram Zubats out of this, which you're not going to see a lot of teams do. And Buddy recognizes that and screens Reggie Jackson into Zubats. So it's effectively sandwiching his own guy. So now the Clippers are having to defend this action 2-on-3, and Isaiah Jackson gets a wide open dunk at the rim with Tyrese Halliburton throwing the lob. So that's pretty much made possible by Buddy recognizing what that defensive coverage is, that there's a slight change. And, it's possible, too, that maybe the coaching staff did a scout on the Clippers because this was the very first time they ran Spain in this game. Maybe they did a scout on the Clippers and were like, hey, Buddy, like, this is the way they're going to guard this. Here's how you can counter it. Maybe that happened. But you can find a lot of instances this year where just Buddy as a stack screener made things open for guys with his technique as a screener in addition to his shooting gravity.
If you heard me blow air through my nose in laughter watching this clip, it's because right after Isaiah Jackson dunks, Reggie Jackson looks at Isaiah and then looks at Zubac and then just puts his hands up like, wait, what happened? Yep. What do I do there? It's pretty, and it's pretty funny. Good field play. This is the first time that happened this game, you're saying, is this moment. Like, great idea from Hield or the Pacers or whoever designed this to say, okay, if they're not going to defend it this way, let's change it up, and it works. And yeah, I agree that, like, in general, when you're one of those players who has to run around and relocate so much, like, you have to be a smart player. Like, you have to understand where the defense is leaning and going, or where the space is going to be, or how you specifically running to a certain spot is going to change where the defense is standing or where they're leaning or what they're prioritizing. And he just runs around like crazy for the first 10 seconds of every possession. And it's very calculated. I don't want to say that it's just like him being his own guy. And that's exceedingly valuable, right? And before the season too, I hate that I even am bringing this up, but like when people were talking about this Westbrook Lakers trade crap, I never thought I'd talk about that again. Part of the reason I thought it was weird that people kept brushing off Hield with the Pacers, specifically their current timeline, is like that spacing for a young team is so valuable, right? Like having easier opportunities for your young guys who are growing and learning together is really important. And because he's able to do that every game, every possession, put fear in a team, run around and cause chaos is so helpful for these guys. And you could see that, like, his offensive on-off impact was nuts. It was like 3 or 4 points per 100 possessions because of those sorts of things.
Yeah, because, I mean, one of the number one tactics, the Pacers are not an isolation-heavy team. They aim to get to the next action, and typically the next action that they go to, I call it a reignition screen. I think they call it blur, but a ghost screen is if Tyrese gets a switch, Buddy would go ghost that switch to create a moment of hesitation, and he's better at that than what Benedict and Chris are able to do at the current juncture as well. I mean, we can think back to the game against Boston late where Tyrese ended up isolating against Marcus Smart in part because Benedict wasn't setting the best possible screens. I mean, Marcus deserves credit for fighting through that action, but the screening set wasn't the best either. So, yeah, definitely. And I'll go right to my number too, because I think this plays into that and what you're saying. So my number is 2.5, and that's how many early 3-point attempts Buddy Hield took per game. And just for point of reference, that led the NBA amongst qualified players. Nobody took more quick threes than Buddy did. Buddy shot 45% on transition threes, and he almost took more early 3-point attempts per game than the Houston Rockets, who averaged 2.9 early threes per game. So he is an individual player, almost attempted more than a team. And there was a current point in time, because I wrote an article about this when I was still at IC, that Tyrese and Buddy had combined for more early threes than 8 NBA teams. And that was in like December. So Buddy's pretty key to how they were establishing their pace as well. If you look at the numbers on cleaning the glass, nobody impacted their transition frequency with a higher swing than Buddy did. It was plus 1.4 percentage points with Buddy, and that's including Tyrese. So Tyrese is the engine to that, but Buddy is most definitely an extension.
One more break here, guys, so I can talk to you about PrizePicks, who's doing a new $1 million daily Superflex promotion for the NBA playoffs every day. One PrizePicks user will win a chance of becoming a millionaire via their playoff daily Superflex promo. Whoever places an entry that gets drawn after the entry is placed at 8 a.m. gets randomly selected every day. If you win, you can do an entry and be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. If you get all 6 right, $1 million, 5 correct, $80,000, 4 correct, $16,000. Full details at prizepicks.com/million. You must opt in at that link to be eligible for the entry. And if you opt in, play the game like normal, you could be the lucky winner. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 6 players, whether they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection. For example, will Luka Doncic, when he was playing, score more or less than 30.5 points in a game? Or LeBron, who is still playing, will he have more or less than 8.5 rebounds? That's the gist. It's super easy. They offer it for tons of sports at tons of levels. You can make your picks super quick, minute or less, and it's operational all over the U.S. and in Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit 100, PrizePicks will give you 100. If you use deposit 50, PrizePicks will give you 50. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 with PrizePicks. Daily fantasy made easy. That's a perfect way to put it. Like a big part of their identity too. And when we do Tyrese, I've already done the clips for those. You'll see a lot of this. Yeah, it's like I wish I had the foresight to at one point make a compilation of opposing teams in transition going, oh crap, when they see Buddy Hield locate to a certain spot on the court and he's open, because you're just so inclined to stop the ball or slow down the most immediate threat to your basket that you lose Buddy Hield, who's one of the best guys in the league at finding open space, like we talked about or a second ago in transition, and that is huge for what the Pacers like to do. And he's really good at too, like even on makes or turnovers and the ball goes into the crowd, like really quick begging for it, like clapping to get it from the ref, because he'll get that opportunity even in a semi-transition situation or just early offense in general, because he knows that weakness is there and he's really good at exploiting it. And that's a valuable skill, especially for, you know, a fast-paced team like the Pacers who just runs you in a track meet. Like Tyson McConnell talked about that at X interviews, right? Some opposing teams said it's so hard for us to scout you because you play that fast, right? You don't know what's coming or when it's coming every possession, and Buddy Hield's a big part of that.
Yeah, and there is strategy to that. I mean, the Pacers aim to play early and opposite and hunt the two-side fast break. So it's effectively Tyrese is going to get the ball. They're going to look to pass it diagonal and create that 2-and-1 advantage on the other side. And a lot of times what you're saying is the case. Like either people run with the rim runner and that sucks it in and Buddy gets a shot, or people go to Buddy and then you're being able to make one extra pass to the corner and that opens up a shot because of what his gravity is. So that's why I wanted to pick that as the one number. My over-under is not going to play into his defense, but I feel like we should talk about the defense here because I don't want it to sound like Buddy had a flawless season. So there were games, obviously, where Buddy got hunted, most notably the Wally Szczerbiak game, if we want to point to that particular Knicks game. Repeatedly in the third quarter, Jalen Brunson was hunting Buddy Hield. That was the one that kind of stood out the most to me, is just looking for side pick and roll after side pick and roll to get Buddy. And it kind of speaks to the defense as a whole that there were at times, maybe to preserve Tyrese's energy, that the Pacers would pre-switch Buddy into actions so that Tyrese wouldn't get put into them. And then a moment that really stands out to me with Buddy's defense is there were occasions earlier in the season before they started doing it as much with Nesmith where they would put Buddy on the centers. People remember this with Kristaps Porzingis and Porzingis scoring over him in the post or guarding Kevin Durant. But he was, in 2 or 3 of the games against the Cavs, he was guarding Jarrett Allen. And they would send Evan Mobley up to screen, and the Pacers would pre-switch Buddy onto Evan Mobley, and there he is, like guarding this 7-foot dude, and not switching out, and like he got beat pretty easily. So we know what Kevin Pritchard said at the presser, that they need Buddy to be better at that end of the floor. I do agree with Buddy to a little bit of an extent, that like the idea that you're not going to put a defense into rotation in today's NBA, I think is a little bit pie in the sky. But I also understand from the Pacers perspective that they need pretty much every single person on this roster to be better at defending the basketball, because schematically they're doing about as much as they can to keep the action out of the paint, and they're not keeping the action out of the paint. So Buddy's definitely one of the people that needed to be better on that end of the floor.
Team defense and closeouts for him, not the greatest. Certainly a ball watcher at this stage of his career, and I think that's a big part of why, like Pritchard named some of the reasons, but they're hesitant. He was asked about an extension, and they're hesitant, right? Because he said, if we can get a role where he's comfortable and we're comfortable, then I'm not opposed to it. So what is that? Is that less of him at all? Is it him off the bench? Is it a situation where he's playing enough that he can play a solid defense for whatever 22 25 minutes, but does that detract from his offense? I don't know. That's what they have to discover, because even with his bananas shooting, like he still is not this he's very good and was a positive impact player for them, certainly, but not the massive impact you'd expect from a guy who's such a good shooter and changes your offense entirely. Like you'd expect that to be a higher level, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I do kind of want to get your feedback on that because I know that during the initial stretch when Tyrese missed 10 games, there was kind of the talking point about, if it were the case where next year they're like, we're starting Benedict, we're starting Andrew, or we're starting whoever we draft, and Buddy is a bench player. How do you think it would impact Buddy to not be playing as many minutes with Tyrese?
Significantly. Well, I was gonna. So as I did, I forget who it was actually talking about their fit with Halliburton. One of the players we already did. Like that's Hield's best skill for the Pacers to me is he fits so well with their best player, like unbelievably well. They're super close. They play together for years. They have great chemistry, and they really bring the best out of each other on the floor, which is great. But like it's also very easy to go to PBP stats and do the on-offs and see Hield without Halliburton and go, oh my gosh, their offensive rating is 111.4. Like even if Hield's a good offensive player, that's really bad, right? Like that's bad, even if he is a good shooter and their defense is still atrocious because it's any lineup for the Pacers. Their defense was atrocious this year. Like, if they play together less, maybe Halliburton can be the same level of player, but then Hield's impact is worse. So then if Mathurin isn't, Matt, of course, he's in more of a growth mindset than Hield is, but, if he's not making up for that, all of a sudden you're probably losing something, even if it might be better long term. So what does that trade off look like? Like their net rating with Hield on and Halliburton off the season, almost 1,000 minutes. So a pretty significant sample, minus 6.4. And with Halliburton on and Hield off, it was minus 8. And that was also a lot of minutes. Like they very clearly lift each other up significantly. So splitting them up is going to be very hard, even if it might be better.
Yeah, I mean, it's the two actions that I just pointed out. He makes their Spain pick and roll a lot more lethal with his gravity, and he's the more effective ghost screener. There was a long portion in time where they were the number one assist combo in the NBA. Buddy did shoot. He shot 43% on threes with Halliburton on the court and 39% without Halliburton. So he's still an effective shooter, but not as effective as he was. But over the last 10 games, when he was coming off the bench and they moved Benedict into the starting lineup, he still shot 41% from three on 7.7 attempts, which is still obviously healthy volume, and was averaging 14 points per game. One thing that did stand out is during the initial 10-game chunk when Tyrese was out, he was still a starter, and he started getting the tougher assignments. Like opposing teams were throwing the better defenders on Buddy. Once Benedict went into the starting lineup and Buddy went to the bench, that's probably why the numbers in part look better, is because, he was out there and he was being out there against opposing bench players rather than, I looked at the matchups, like he was being defended by Zaire Williams, which for Memphis actually worked pretty well. They top blocked Buddy. They took him out a lot of the actions. Mikal Bridges at Phoenix guarded Buddy. KCP and Bruce Brown guarded Buddy in Denver. Lou Dort guarded Buddy in OKC. Those are all matchups that Tyrese would have got if he was healthy. Like that's who would have been guarding him. So it did make his life a little bit tougher. But this actually, all of this goes right into the over/under. So I'll just go there. 4.5, and that I set that at the line for number of players for the Pacers who will average more minutes than Buddy Hield next season.
Dang, that's a good one. Okay, well, Tyrese Halliburton and Miles is 2. You already got me thinking, man, it just depends so much on, well, Miles, I mean, was even behind him pretty significantly this year. I'd imagine
Buddy was second in minutes behind only Tyrese. So
Mathurin, in theory, I would think would pass him. Man, who they draft is a big factor for me here. I'll probably say he'd be 4th, so I would say under. But that is tricky. Like if he's not starting on day one, I'll take the over certainly. But if there's some questions about where that goes, I think I'd put him exactly 4th. So
yeah, it's possible that Andrew might play more minutes than him too.
I think that is
depending
also
upon
possible.
what goes on with TJ as well. So that this is where it circles back to Kevin Pritchard's comments about can they both sides be happy with what role it would be. So that was kind of why I brought that up as the over under.
I was so inclined to say over right away, but it's really hard to say. And like if their identity changes to be more defensive, then I definitely take the over, but that depends on who they get or what their offseason looks like, obviously.
So that concludes my Buddy thoughts.
Let's go from a shooter to a guy that I can't believe we're going to be talking about his shooting at all. TJ McConnell, the 50-40, not quite 90 guy from the season. That was maybe the most disappointing thing for me is when he hit a game, he went like 2 for 5 from the foul line. And with how little he gets to the foul line, there was no way he was ever getting back to 90%.
Just ruined it.
It was fantastic.
TJ goes down in history as one of the few 50-40-90 players.
His volume, I don't think. I think some people say there's a volume component to it. I don't know
Oh,
if there is,
yeah,
but
there most likely probably
there
is.
probably is. Interesting season for him because last year he obviously had the wrist injury and didn't play much, but even before that, like it felt like that little 8 foot leaner he had wasn't falling as much as it did during the Bjorkgren season. The steal rate wasn't nearly as high. Obviously, it was incredible in the Bjorkgren season. Like he just felt like took a step back and he turned 30 that year. So I thought, oh man, what's this gonna look like? And this year, the leaner was back. The three was a thing. Made his free throws more. The defensive steal rate went up a little bit again. Like it felt more like a TJ McConnell season, which I think was important given the way the Pacers play and the fact that they have point guard depth behind Tyrese Halliburton.
Yeah, and for all the warts that Nate Bjorkgren had, and there were many, that system on both ends of the floor really fit TJ like a glove. And at the beginning of last season, as people will likely recall, there were times where they were closing games when Karras and TJ Warren weren't playing with TJ McConnell in the closing lineup, and he'd be playing off ball, like dotting a corner, and nobody's guarding him, and that's making the spacing a lot harder for Malcolm Brogdon to be navigating the paint with Miles and Sabonis out there. And it didn't always feel to me that they were always putting TJ in the best actions for him. But this year, when we look at it, like you look at the numbers on Synergy, how often he's attacking baseline out of pick and rolls, like you can pretty much count if the Indiana Pacers run some form of pistol for TJ McConnell, he's going to get 2 feet in the paint. Like he's going to turn the corner, he's going to get 2 feet in the paint, and then that's going to trigger a 45 cut from the weak side, and he's probably going to find that guy. Like that was probably one of their more reliable forms of offense, if we're being honest, this season. So, and then as you say, like this year when he was open in the corner and other spots, he was actually willing to shoot it, especially over the last several games. So I think that's a good segue into what you have queued up here for us today.
Yeah, okay, we'll do the clip first since we're already talking about the shooting. And it's 4 threes, but it's not that there's threes attempted, it's the way he takes them. First one's against Phoenix. I just realized it's probably going to play volume on my computer, so I got to mute some tabs before we get some volume. But the first one's against Phoenix, and he goes into a little pitch, dribble handoff with Miles Turner. Defense, Torrey Craig, Pacer legend, goes under, and he shoots. Like that is not a thing TJ McConnell was doing very much in past seasons. Drills it, right? Second one against the Heat, same thing. No pitch this time. He has the ball. Defender goes under, and he shoots, right? Not a thing from him in the past. The third one, perhaps the most important one for next season with the Pacers, is he's playing with Halliburton, running in transition, and he locates to the corner and is wide open, catches it, and shoots a three in transition. Fourth one against the Hornets. This one could have been used for the Turner one or the Mathurin one of these shows. Turner has a small on him in the post, so the Hornets defense is a little bit afraid of Turner down low. They send two to him. Mathurin hits McConnell in the corner. And this one in my notes during this game was the fastest I think McConnell's ever gone from catch to shoot ever. And he takes a corner three. And so just the methods of getting him up, where it was faster, it was punishing people going under, it was off of pitches, it was locating. Like, no, it's not just that he, like in the past, he just took open ones slowly. Now he has like a little bit of a weapon there. And I think that him taking them is honestly a little more important than the volume necessarily, just in terms of defenders eventually maybe like scooting towards him a little bit. So that's why I thought the style of them was more important than the accuracy of them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the Charlotte one's definitely interesting because initially Nick Richards isn't caring about him to go put extra help to Miles to, potentially dig down on that pass. And then, like you said, because TJ gets it off, Nick Richards is tall. Like he has a long arm to close out there, and TJ's still able to get it off. So that's a positive sign. I mean, we probably could have even thrown a couple more types in here because I remember a few games at the end of the year where he was actually willing to pull up in transition when he was the
Yeah.
ball handler and shoot it. And there was another one where he slid along. I about lost my mind. I think it was against the Celtics where Buddy was the ball handler and TJ McConnell slid into the corner and shot a three off of movement. Like I don't know how many threes I've ever seen TJ McConnell shoot off of movement. In fact, I think when I wrote the piece about Tyrese Halliburton's jump passing, I pointed out in there that sometimes the wheels in Tyrese's head can move faster than the moving parts on the court. And a couple times he threw the ball to where TJ should have gone, but TJ, not being a movement shooter, didn't have those types of instincts. So to see him actually doing that, like there certainly was some progress. I didn't see a lot of change from defenders. Like we have seen him. I mean, he shoots the pull up two a lot when teams go under. But what you're pointing out here, like him shooting a three when a team goes under, we haven't seen a whole lot of. So his release is still relatively slow, so you can probably bank on helping off of him to a degree. And I'm kind of surprised with certain actions they ran, like the play that I brought up with Jordan Moore on that episode when TJ goes to the strong side corner. The fact that people would stay on him in those instances instead of tagging off from him was kind of interesting. The biggest change I can remember seeing defensively was in the Martin Luther King Day game when TJ had the 20 points in the first half. Like,
Legendary.
the Bucks hedged on a Spain pick and roll when TJ McConnell was the ball handler. Like, Brooke Lopez came out above the level of the screen when TJ McConnell was running offense.
So,
like, it was wild.
I almost included that one, but he was so hot that game that I just threw it out. I was like, this doesn't count. This doesn't count. And it was funny going through his, like, watching all his threes on a list, because all of a sudden there's just this early January stretch where it's like make because of that game. He actually went 2 for 2, I think, in the game before against Memphis. So it just looked like he was the best shooter in the NBA for like 3 days.
Yeah, there was also another play late against Milwaukee where Drew ducked under, but he didn't stay under. He surged out of the under to contest TJ's shot, and then TJ got off the ball and used like a give and go. So that was kind of another moment where it's like, oh, a slight adjustment from a defender. So I mean, he put the work in. He was willing. I mean, these are free points. Like, if nobody's going to guard you and you can tee up and hit a three, like, that's free offense for you. Right. So definitely didn't hurt that he was doing it.
Now, my 2 addendums about it would be, 1, we're talking about 59 attempts still. Like, that's not very many, but willing is way, 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 way better than not willing, especially if you hit 44% of them. But also, if you miss 2 more of those, it's like 37 or 38%. So we are talking about razor thin margins. But also for the Pacers in general, like, I'll never forget when Gabe York took what was it, 6 threes in his first game. Someone asked Rick after the game about, Gabe York having a green light. He's like, have you been watching this year? Like, everybody has a green light. Like, McConnell being more willing and out of more situations to shoot, I think, in the way the Pacers play is important just because he has that light.
Yeah. I mean, especially when he's on ball. I mean, when he's in these roles where he's going to be off ball. They did play a decent amount of minutes with at least 2 point guards on the floor this year. Right. So it does make a difference by comparison to where they were at the beginning of last season.
And that's why that one with Halliburton, I think, is the most important one of those 4, because if they can play together, that is significant. The stat here is first. But for the first, we'll go backwards a little bit. TJ McConnell played 20 minutes per game this season, slightly over that, 20.3, 20.4, something like that to be exact. He was first in the NBA among players with fewer than 29 minutes per game in drives per game for a Pacers team that likes those paint touches, likes to spray out, start from inside, make a defense move, make them make decisions, and get into it early. Being able to get by anybody basically at any time is so valuable. Like, he fakes like he's going to pull it out, and then he crosses right by you. He's got a really quick first step. He just reads where he can get into the lane. And that's a 9 minutes per game gap that we're talking about. If you go to 31 minutes per game, the only guy ahead of him by half a drive per game is Russell Westbrook, right? You have to go to 32 minutes to get John Morant in there. Like, that's how often TJ McConnell is driving when he's in the game. And that makes their bench offense at least somewhat credible or potent, regardless of who the other 4 players are, basically. And that's really valuable, I feel like, to the way the Pacers team plays.
Yeah, having somebody who can probe the offense is always a good thing. And that's why I brought that up right off of the top. Like, you could pretty much always assume that when they run their corner action where they hold up C and the guard comes and sets a touch screen, they actually set that screen for TJ so that he can turn the corner into what becomes pistol. You can about guarantee he's going to get 2 feet in the paint. And that was the case under Bjorkgren. Like, Bjorkgren ran a ton of baseline, sideline action for him where it was like a down screen, him get the ball, then you pass it back into Chase and he would turn the corner. The Pacers did some of that this year too with Bjorkgren and Nembhard, almost the identical action. And like I said, then it just triggers those cuts. They know that they're going to collapse. The guy on the 45 is going to cut in. And then if the defense goes with him, then you're getting a wide open 3 and it's a cut assist. Like, they could run that I don't know how many times a game, and I'm sure that the points per production yield, if they're tracking, which I'm sure they are, tracking which play types yield the most points for them, was going to be an effective form of offense.
Every NBA team loves rim pressure. Like, he's right ahead of Devin Booker in drives. And Booker played 14 minutes more per game. He's right behind Jalen Green, Westbrook, Brandon Ingram, Kevin Porter, Jimmy Butler, Giannis. That's the group. The names in front of him just going up the list. Like, that doesn't make sense, like, with just what he is and what he does. And that's why I think that 8-foot little fader is so important, because then it's not just like, whatever, he's not going to score in the lane. Like, no, he can. He has something he can do with at least 1 point per possession accuracy, even when he gets down there. So I think that's just such a huge play for this team that does like to play early and get to the rim. But let's flip it back. We're talking a lot about offense, by the way, even my over-unders offense. So if you have a defensive note on McConnell, I would love to hear that now.
Well, I think something we can point out about TJ is that there were a few games this year where they swapped offense for defense at the end of the game and took Tyrese out of the game to play TJ. Like we can remember in the game where TJ made the game winner, they put TJ in for that final possession, and Tyler Hero ended up getting lost on the off-ball screening action, in part because I think Bam might have set a slightly illegal screen on TJ, but they definitely trusted him in that regard to be pressuring ball handlers and to be chasing in those situations because they chose him. Like they made those types of subs. A year ago, which I probably could have brought up with regard to Chris Duarte, is there were games where they would pick Chris Duarte to kind of mimic some of what TJ would do and have him, pressuring full court. They might throw him out there on against the Chris Paul or whatever. And this year that was mainly and only TJ. Sometimes Aaron Nesmith would get unleashed as a full court pest, but mainly it's still TJ. So his on-ball pressure is something that not a lot of people on the roster can replicate.
Yeah. It's very rare that a 6-foot-tall player is a good defender, right? Like that was actually something I talked about a lot when they picked Aaron Holiday. It's like Lowry and Chris Paul and kind of some other guys sometimes. Like McConnell, I think, is in that group where it's hard to be a good defender at that height, but he is. My over-under is 10. I got to find the tab to make sure I got this right. Why did I open so many tabs for this? There it is. Okay, 10%. That is frequency of TJ McConnell shots next season that are catch and shoot. 9.4% this past season. Does he keep ascending as a shooter and that climbs over 10, or does that stabilize or go down a little bit?
I think I might take the over. I can't believe I'm saying that, but I think I might take the over because I think that they will probably lean into having Andrew do some more point guard things. And if he does, then that means TJ might be playing off ball even more. And if he is, like he seemed in his post-game or postseason exit interview, especially with how much praise he gave to Jenny Busick, that he has more confidence in at least doing it, and which is what you mentioned several times here. So if they are going to play more point guard lineups, he might find himself away from the ball more, and there might be more opportunities for him to tee up shots like that. So I think I will take the slightly over.
I will too, and I think he's probably close to his limit just because of his volume. Like again, if he misses 4 more this season, we're not even talking about his shooting right now. But it could be valuable for him, especially if he is playing with another guard a lot. And I think the fact that they can get away with those units is still really important, just because of and last year they played so many 3-4 guard lineups that they kind of had to at times. But if they have that option next year, depending on what their team looks like, I think that's going to be important for them. And what lineup they give up to do that at the expense of the forward discussion we had last week, or whoever their new player is, or whatever new players are. They don't have a lot of roster spots, so I keep doing singulars for that. Will be very telling, I think, of what they feel about him and what he adds to their team.
Well, there is one more veteran guard that we haven't talked about. Do you want to share your favorite George Hill moment on the season?
The 45-footer in New York has to be up there, I think. Just
that borderline changed the Pacers draft odds.
Yeah, they won their tiebreaker, so it's a very small percent change, but I'm sure when the Magic win the lottery now, everybody will point to that George Hill half-court shot.
He did make 5 threes in that game.
But that was the win that cost it for them. Remember, not the other 34. It was one.
It will be that one.
It was that one specifically.
Yeah, it won't be Nemhard's game winner against the Lakers.
Not the Lakers game. Not
Tyrese's 2 game winners either.
None of those. Just that one.
The half-court shot from George Hill. But I guess my favorite George Hill moment was probably the win over the Bucks that they got when Brook Lopez was out and George Hill was actually on the court at the end of the game for some of the closing minutes. And that was against the team that traded him. And he and Wara were out there for a bit, but it was nostalgic for me to look out there and see George Hill in a closing lineup against an Eastern Conference contender. So that's probably the most the thing I'm going to remember about George Hill coming back to the Pacers this year.
He can still play, certainly. If they have to choose between James Johnson and George Hill for roster spot reasons for a vet, like the fact that Hill can play and you need ball handlers kind of helps him in this instance.
So you're ignoring the fact that they started James Johnson a few games this year?
No, I don't want to do the roster spot problem is the only reason this is a conversation. I mean, does James Johnson belong in this category since he played point guard in Portland that one time?
Yes, veteran guard. He played point guard in that game up in Detroit too. When they ran that wild lineup that was like Jalen Smith, James Johnson, Wara, O'Shea, and Chris. Remember that? Like, he was literally the only ball handler on the
Oh,
court.
yeah, I
With 4
remember.
forwards at once.
I don't remember it for good reasons, but I remember. Yeah, my favorite James Johnson moment would be also in the Knicks game when he had a step back long two off the dribble. I was like, as soon as he took that, I knew what that game was going to be. I was like, I'm going to turn on the Wizards Rockets game.
I feel like the thing that I remember most about James Johnson is I do not think that he wants to use eye contact when he runs a DHO. Like, I don't think anyone does more blind DHOs than James Johnson. So that's what I have to say about him.
I know that you can hear what players say. This is to listeners, not you, and just be like, yeah, I hear that James Johnson's a good vet. Like, via interacting with him, that he is an A1 person. Like, he is awesome. He's just an absolute blast to talk to about anything. If a bear or lion would win in a fight or actual basketball, James Johnson will have a very fascinating answer to the question. I am very happy that I got to meet him this year. And I think some basketball moments against his old team, the Nets, were pretty fun too, because Rick was very happy that he had a free scout on his team against them early in the season a few times. Those were the only times he was actually playing. I got nothing else on these players today, unless you do, Caitlin.
Yeah, they did match up James Johnson's minutes with Kevin Durant in that game and had him guard Kevin Durant. I do remember that vividly. But yeah, I think that concludes my thoughts about James Johnson and George Hill.
I'll be curious if they can both. I mean, they both had a lot of value to this team. Like, I learned a lot about what vets can mean to a young team this season.
Well, you can see the difference between Houston and the Pacers. I mean, I know that the Rockets are pretty interested in adding veterans after what their season was like this year. So I think that there was value to that.
I agree, especially with, seeing McConnell be more of a coach last year with his broken wrist. How all that plays into a young team is really important. Pouring back in, as a lot of people say, is valuable. Next up for Caitlin and I will be Andrew Nemhard, who I fought for him to get his own episode. I'm kidding. I just decided that he should, because his season is so fascinating to me, and I have no idea what his ceiling is. That will be coming later this week. Anything else on anybody today, Caitlin?
No, I'm prepared and ready to talk about Andrew Nemhard later this week. I got both the rookie assignments, and you got the other 2 solo episodes.
Well, I'm excited for the Tyrese episode whenever we get to that one. So yes, that's all coming. Also this week on Locked On Pacers, we got a CBA PDF changes thing in the media landscape. So we'll talk about what that could mean for the Pacers. And I won't say who because we haven't confirmed a time yet, but a guest talking about the French tall guy, Victor Wembanyama. So lots of fun stuff coming. Pre-lottery. I have to do that one before the lottery because there's a chance it doesn't matter.
You have to get people's hopes up. I mean, that's part of your job.
Well, I think just chronologically, if I do it after the lottery, they don't win. It's like, why am I wasting the time talking about it at that point?
My guess would be like, look over here. It's Sad Jeff T.
I'll keep that in mind. So thank you all for listening today. You can subscribe to Caitlin's work at patreon.com/basketball. She wrote to read her last 2 mailbags, as well as see the clips that we talked about today and much, much more on the Pacers. And I presume draft stuff, although I'll let her speak to that coming soon.
That's in the plans.
Good. Okay. Thank you guys a ton for listening. We'll see you soon.